Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Maybe to add to some of the points, I think obviously Section 28 of the Principal Act is dealing with the issue of ministerial guidelines regarding standards in buildings. Deputy Wallace has dealt with a number of those, and I suppose one of the problems we have, and the reason we're opposing Section 3 of this bill, is that we don't think that concentrating more power in the hands of the Minister is the right move to make. Now, we obviously discussed this at second stage, and the belief is that this bill, or part of it at least, has its origin in the moves by Dublin City Council to have a higher standard than the minimum. They've obviously been under pressure for a whole number of years to release that and change that, whereas I think they were actually quite good in the stance that they took. But not only are we providing here for the bill without our amendment for increased ministerial input, but there's actually no democratic oversight at all. So what we're trying to do in terms of Amendment 1B, we've inserted a provision that would subject any guidelines drawn up by the Minister to a vote by the Houses of the Oireachtas, which I think is reasonable if the full view of the Houses is to be inputted in what is a critical area of concern. Our other amendment, 1A, we've set out minimum standards for apartments. Obviously, Deputy Wallace dealt with some of them. They're not exhaustive, but we see them really as being pretty much basic minimum standards for many different aspects, which should comprise a modern living space. We think more detailed guidelines will have to be drawn up, and while we want to leave it open to local authorities to set higher ones, we think that it's only right that the general national guidelines should be subjected to parliamentary scrutiny, and that is something that we feel is very important, and is contained in Amendment 1B in this group of amendments. Now, the Minister is on record as saying that even if this bill is passed, we'll still supposedly have the most generous minimum apartment standards in Europe. But we can't say that for sure, because we haven't seen the guidelines yet and we don't know what they are. Our current national minimum might be generous, say, compared to London, but I don't think London is a good benchmark given the problems that any family or group of people have in trying to live in London. I wouldn't be setting them up as an example anywhere. And the reality is that our standards are miles behind where other European cities are. And I think, for example, the guideline minimum size for a two-bedroom family apartment in Germany is 88 square metres. In 2007 national guidelines, which everything suggests the Minister really isn't going to change all that much when he updates and publishes the new one, whatever that might be, the minimum size for a two-bed is 73 square metres. So that's 15 square metres less than the minimum in Germany. That's really a whole living room size of space for a family to live in. And that's the issue that we're trying to get at. I agree with the points made by Deputy Wallace. We need a cultural shift in attitude to apartment living. But we're not going to get it if people are subjected to dog boxes in tiny standards that are not suitable living for families. We're not going to, the present type of planning whereby people are living in low-density housing in the suburbs, contributing to climate change by being forced to transport their children in and out to access amenities and so on, is not a good way forward. Apartment living can be good if it's done properly with the minimums that we're putting in. Well insulated, sound insulated, large apartments with high ceilings that you don't bang your head off when you go in, where you have enough storage space in medium density blocks with some outside space are the best way actually to raise families. But it's not really the norm in Ireland. It is the norm in Germany, in Italy, in Austria and so on, and it does allow for a concentration of amenities like playground, shops, post offices, restaurants and all the rest of it. Cycling and walking can be encouraged in that environment and so on, and I think that is the way forward, rather than what we have now, condemning people to low-density suburban living with a long commute, adding to our climate change and emission standards. So, I mean, the problem, I suppose, that we have is that 40% of all of Ireland's residential housing stock was built between 1991 and 2010. Obviously, that's the biggest proportion of new housing stock anywhere in Europe, with Spain coming second. But given that very little construction has happened since 2007, when the new national guidelines were brought in, what we can say is that the majority of units which are there and which were built in that period of explosive growth were built when the standard was 55 square metres for two-bedroom apartments. So what we're trying to say is we believe, although I go back to the point we made at second stage, that we don't actually have full data, that there is sufficient stock of small units, of small two-bedroom apartments, of small two-bedroom houses and so on, and we need to look at the idea of building larger apartments, and that's what our amendments are geared towards, because we think we have enough of the rest. I mean, Ireland has the single greatest proportion of single-family houses relative to apartments anywhere else in Europe. 90% of our residential stock is made up of houses, with only just about 10% in apartments, and by contrast in Germany it's 40% in apartments, just under 35% in France and 30% in Germany. So we do have an under-provision actually in terms of apartments, with a knock-on effect in terms of poor transport policy, energy efficiency and spatial strategy. So what we're trying to do in these standards is direct a new approach to a better type of living, which is better for quality of life, and actually in terms of climate obligations and that as well, which we are absolutely linked into or have to be. I mean, you look at things like insulation. Insulation in Ireland is just laughably bad. It's frightening, and combined with the dearth of apartment living, it means that actually Ireland has the single greatest CO2 emissions per useful floor area in its buildings by miles, compared to the whole rest of Europe, including, I might add, Eastern Europe. Irish buildings emit over 120 kilograms of CO2 per square metre. Emissions in Italy, by comparison, are just over 40 kilograms of CO2 per square metre. In Germany, it's around 65 kilograms, and the average in Europe is 54 kilograms, which, in light of the discussions that took place in Paris last week, are incredibly important, we believe. So, to talk about more generous minimums, more storage space, bigger balconies, higher ceilings, this isn't like sort of, socialist utopia or anything like that. Far from it. We'd actually say that Germany, which has had actually quite a right-wing government since 2005, would be absolutely horrified by the quality and style of accommodation that Irish people are expected to live in, and by the dreadful state of our public transport network, I would say. So what we have really is the legacy of a failure of successive governments to stand up to the Construction Industry Federation and so on. I mean, we already have 2,700 hectares of land across all of the Dublin local authorities that are currently zoned residential. In the heart of the inner city, there's 60 hectares already zoned. That's about 96 football pitches worth of land that's already zoned, but nothing has happened on it. And what we're trying to do is to put some better standards on that, so that we can have some real quality family type living in the heart of the city centre. And the last point I'll make, Ceann Comhairle, is in terms of the points that Deputy Wallace made in terms of REITs and the role of NAMA in distorting the market, because it is absolutely frightening what's going on in the moment, not just the numbers of units that's been handed over to US vulture funds, but we now have the Irish Residential Properties REIT has become Ireland's largest landlord, acquiring 800 units from NAMA last year, and this group has decided to up the rents by 20%. The same group has acquired, or is on the verge of acquiring, 442 units from NAMA in Tallaght for 83 million, 40 units in Terranure for 12 million. Now, the annualised rents in these dwellings, which are at 85% occupancy, are at about 5 million. So they're already making money, and they are being given over by a song. And because of the scale and the size of these organisations, they are distorting the rental market, which is having an enormously negative impact on citizens in this state and leading to many of the problems that all of us on all sides of the House are having to grapple with on a daily basis. So that's why we're putting forward these group of amendments. We think it will put some shape onto development going forward. It will give some accountability to the houses of the Oireachtas rather than just the Minister per se, and will still allow the local authorities a certain leeway to build beyond the minimum standards.